You now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to today's webinar session titled A Simplified Approach to Conducting Literature Searches. The webinar, as usual, has been organized by Plus-Circle Community Health Advancement Organization, a non-profit non-government organization which is committed to advancing community health and research. Participants are muted as they join to avoid distractions. And we promise that the session would be as participatory as possible. Immediately after the presentation by our speaker, we would have a Q&A session where we would accommodate questions and responses from our speaker. Okay, so for the Q&A session, you can always use the chat box even during the presentation to post your comments and questions. Or you could use the hand raise icon at the end of the presentation where we would accommodate participants rather, to unmute their microphones in an orderly fashion to ask their questions. Immediately, I would be proceeding to read the bio of our speaker. Dr. Laura Scrip is an associate professor with joint appointments at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and the Nagasaki University. She also serves as a co-founder and executive director of Q4D Laboratory. Dr. Scrip is a quantitative epidemiologist with expertise in mathematical modeling and statistical analysis, as well as the design and conduct of field studies to collect data on health-related behavior and decision-making during infectious disease outbreaks. She has extensive experience working with national programs, including malaria control, immunization, and nutrition programs, as part of efforts to strengthen local capacity for evidence generation and utilization in post-Ebola Liberia. Dr. Scrip has also studied contextual barriers to building and sustaining capacity for advanced analysis, including modeling, to inform development of locally owned programs in West Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause and excitement, please let's welcome Dr. Laura Scrip. Over to you, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I would like to make this as interactive as possible. If you have any immediate kind of questions related to clarification of something I've said, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat. I will try to monitor the chat as we go. I don't want to move forward too quickly and lose anyone just because of something not being clear. And then at the end, the Q&A, we can, go into more depth on anything you have additional questions on. Okay. There are, just as a heads up, there are a few slides in here where I'm asking you to participate in sort of an interactive poll. We'll see how it goes. If enough people are participating, we'll continue it. But if not, if people don't have the ability to do that while watching the Zoom call, then that's okay as well. All right. So literature search, just a little bit about why before we jump into how to do them. So for research and for evidence generation, there's a lot of emphasis on within academics on conducting and publishing of research. And there are a lot of benefits to doing that, particularly for the individuals who are conducting the research and those who may be directly involved in the research. So, it's building up people's CVs, it's creating new leaders in the field, and putting evidence out there. But the kind of key piece that's necessary is the application of this research. So making sure that people are aware of the research and if they find it relevant and useful to what they're working on, programs in particular, then applying the research findings. And then that combination, so you need both of these pieces, can lead to greater impact. So more people actually benefiting from that research or that evidence that was generated. And so literature searches are important pieces to both of these things, both to actually doing the research. It's important to conduct literature searches and understand what's already been done and how you're contributing to the existing evidence base. But it's also really important then for those who are using the evidence, so programmatic, program managers, just people who are actually working in public health as public health practitioners. That includes just people like community health workers all the way up to policymakers at the national level. And so being able to search the literature for evidence that is high quality and meaningful to your work is really important. So we'll touch a bit about how to do literature searches depending on your particular motivation for doing them. Okay, so I want to test this out and see how much engagement we get this through this. But I just want to see where everybody is in terms of already conducting literature searches. So I wanted to better understand from the audience how often you use, say, Google to search for scientific evidence. So if you want to participate in this poll, you can just snap this QR code. Or you can go to slido.com and it'll prompt you to put in a number and then this poll will pop up. So I don't want to use up too much time, but maybe give everyone 1 or 2 minutes and we'll see how many people are able to participate so that we can decide if we want to do more of these later in the presentation. Okay, so let me give everyone maybe just 30 more seconds for those who are able to click on this and try. Okay. So it seems like there's a high proportion of participants on this call who are regularly searching for scientific evidence through Google. So it sounds like you already have quite a bit of expertise, and I hope you'll still find some of the tips I'm sharing useful. Okay, so that proportion is increasing even more. So there's still about 34%. So 1/3 of the participants, or possibly less, who aren't doing this every day, but on a regular basis. Okay, great. Thank you for participating in that. Okay. So again, just a little bit about motivation and why we're doing this. But what is a literature search? Um, what I'm going to be focusing on is the actual searching part. So use of online databases or search engines to gather existing information for addressing a question. Okay. So really focusing on gathering of information or evidence to address a question. And then there are different tools that we use in order to accomplish that. And, nowadays everything's done online, but there are physical resources as well. So you could remove the word online and use databases that are paper-based and in libraries as well, if that's what you have access to. And a literature search is really a key thing, but it's just the first step. So it's the step of gathering the information, but then really synthesizing it, reading it, putting it together to make the decision is the review of the evidence. So that's a whole nother skill set that I'm not going to be talking about today, just focusing on how to start to gather and identify the information. And on the left here, when I talk about things like search engines, I already asked you about one. I asked you about Google. So Google is an example of a search engine. There are other online databases such as PubMed. So for those of you who are health researchers, PubMed is probably something you're well aware of. It's an online database that a lot of scientific literature can be found by searching there. But there are other types of databases as well, such as library databases or institutional databases. The World Health Organization, Africa CDC, on their websites, they have online databases that can be searched as well. And the type of information in each of these databases is slightly different. And I'll have some resources linked within the presentation where you can explore some existing databases based on your particular information needs. So why do we want to search the literature? Why do we want to gather information? And there really could be so many reasons. This is not only for a systematic review. You just could be searching the literature to learn more about a specific topic of interest. Maybe it's something you recently heard about. You read something in the news about an emerging infectious disease or about a new vaccine that's under development, and you just want to learn more. So it could be as simple as that, and those are really important literature searches as well. It could be to generate a new idea or hypothesis. So you may already be working on something and you want to see where there are gaps in the literature. So you want to come up with a new idea that's that has some validity to it and is based already in existing scientific information. Or maybe you want to prepare a literature review for publication. So this could be a whole publication, could be just based on a literature review. Those are called systematic reviews or scoping reviews. Or it could be just as part of a publication. When you write a scientific article, there's a background or introduction section that should be based in the literature. So you would need to do a thorough literature research before writing that section as well. Okay, so a lot of those reasons I just mentioned are sort of for this first component, to conduct and publish research. I've added a couple more reasons at the bottom here. You might want to search the evidence or literature to inform a decision. And that could be a decision if you're in a decision-making position about changing a policy or making a decision about a program that you are part of. Or it could be to make a personal decision about your own health. And we'll go through a couple examples of 3 of these reasons. But those last 2 I just went over are, again, more about application of research. So it's not about kind of starting to think about your own research or putting together a publication of research you've done, but instead now it's about using or applying research that has already been conducted. Okay, so again, that's a bit about the why or the background of what a literature search is and why you may want to conduct one. But now, what are steps on how to do it? So we're going to go through 5 steps and then just talk about them in general, and then I will go through 3 examples of actually applying these 5 steps. Okay, so this is my approach to doing a literature search, and in a 45-minute presentation, there's only so much I can cover. So I want to make sure you have some actionable sort of guidance on how to get started. But there are many resources that go into a lot of depth on the specific steps. And so I've also included some references so you can access those resources. They're free online resources. Okay, so step 1, just make sure you have a clear idea of why you are doing the search. And this is just, what motivated you to do the literature search. And it's important to actually be clear about this because it guides some of the decisions you'll have to make in the other 4 steps of this process. Okay, so again, why are you conducting the search? Is it to you have a personal health concern and you need to make a decision that you want to make a well-informed decision, or is it that you are you've conducted a study and you're about to write it up as a publication, so you want to have as up-to-date evidence to cite in the background section, right? So just make sure you have a clear idea of why it is you're going to be doing the literature search. And then for the second step, state your topic or question of interest. So now that you understand why you're doing it, what is it that you want to search for evidence about? And it's important to be as specific as possible. So regardless of your reason for doing the literature search, you want to be quite specific when you're ultimately doing the search in a database or search engine. Okay. So like as one example, if you're questioning whether to change a dosing schedule for a particular vaccine, for instance, the HPV, human papillomavirus vaccine, there's a 3-dose regimen, 2-dose regimen, and now there's even evidence to support a single dose. And so maybe you're in a position of wanting to find evidence about going from a 3-dose schedule to a 2-dose schedule. Okay, so when you want to talk about your topic or question of interest, your question wouldn't be, are 3 doses better than 2? Okay, so you would want to be a bit more specific than that. You would want to say, is the 2-dose regimen for the HPV vaccine, as effective as the 3-dose regimen? So you just want to make sure you're specific as possible. Okay, and if it's for scientific or research purposes, there are some established approaches that could help you in really defining your question. And so I've linked a particular resource here from McMaster University. But this approach has you thinking about like the population that you have interest in. If you want evidence that's for how something works among females, for instance, or adult females or pregnant females or adolescent males, right? You just would want to have that information about the specific intervention, about the outcome of interest. So if the intervention is the vaccine, then the outcome might be how protective is it? What is its effectiveness? And so this is just a sort of series of questions that help you then come up with your own research question or topic of interest that you would then be searching for. So you know it in your head, but just how to sort of type it into the search engine. That's what this resource would help you do. Okay, so step 1 was to understand why you want to do the search. Step 2 is to be very clear and specific about the topic that you want to do the search on. Now, step 3 is the type of literature you would like to find. So again, this relates back to that step 1 of why you want to do this. For certain reasons, if you want to do a systematic review of the literature and publish that systematic review, then most likely you're going to need articles like from scientific journals that have been peer reviewed, or reports from established authorities in health. If your decision is something more personal, maybe you want to read online news articles or that were written by experts, but not necessarily in the format of a scientific article, which has a bit more technical language, and you may not need that level of language to make a decision. Okay. Yes, so I see a comment about slides for reference, and we can find a way to make sure to share them. Otherwise, I can upload them to the chat at the end. Okay. For either or for any of these options about the type of literature you want to find, quality matters. So just because you may be okay reading a news article and get information from there, doesn't mean you want to read a news article from anywhere. Or if you're okay getting information from social media, I know a lot of researchers, colleagues who post about their work on social media. So that doesn't mean social media is always a bad source. You just want to make sure that there is quality, and that when you're reviewing literature, regardless of the where you're finding it or what type of literature you're searching for, make sure it's high quality. And so there are different ways to evaluate the quality of information, but some things you want to consider is, are there scientific articles that are being cited or referenced in that source? Was it written by someone who should have authority? For instance, a medical doctor or a researcher with expertise in that particular area? Is it something very recent and reflecting the most up-to-date information? Okay, and so there are different guides or again, like very short steps you can take to assess quality. Okay, so now just reviewing why we want to do literature search, what our topic of interest is the second step. Then what types of literature or evidence are we interested in? And now based on all of those kind of steps, we're going to select a source or a database or search engine that is best suited to help you do the literature search, okay? And so there are many, many databases. On a previous slide, I showed you there's Google Scholar, databases on institutional websites. There are library databases. And then there's, just Google, a search engine that you can use. So if your purpose is to come up with scientific literature to support a report you're writing, maybe as part of a consultancy, then you might want to use the literature you may be looking for are either other reports, maybe in other settings, or published peer-reviewed scientific articles. So if that's the case, you could use just Google as a starting point, but maybe Google Scholar or PubMed might be a better database to use for conducting your literature search. So again, based on sort of the previous steps, you're going to choose where to look for your literature and your evidence. Okay. And if you just do a Google search for databases for research, you can see here, I think there are, there are many listed here. Some of these, are ones we've already talked about. Others like Web of Science, Scopus, Science Direct, you may come across because they're quite well known. Some of these, though, require payment or allow you access to a few articles. And then so you have to create an account, and creating the account is free, and that gives you maybe access to 4 or 5 downloads. But then after that, they start to get asked for money. So I think sometimes, yeah, it's helpful to be aware of different research databases. And it's not always the database that's asking for the money, it's the journal where the article was published. Okay, and then the last step is to now take your topic and put it into a list of words that you're actually going to put into the search engine or the database, and do your search. Okay, and so I think that this is it's kind of overlaps a bit with step 2. But for a particular database, there are certain terms that you may want to use, or a certain way of arranging the terms that are specific to that database. And we'll go through one example to show you where it may not just be typing sort of your question, but a little more complicated than that. Okay, so we're going to go through 3 examples now. And example 1, these are starting out kind of simple, just to kind of warm up a little bit, but maybe the first example is just something, again, about a personal health decision that you want to have some literature or evidence to support your decision. So it could be as simple as something like trying a new food. So I recently relocated from West Africa to Japan. And so the food here is quite different, and there are different types of food that people commonly eat for health. And so I wanted to better understand, whether this was a decision I wanted to make for my own health, and whether, there's anything I should know before trying a new food. So there's a bean called natto. It's a soybean, and people sometimes eat it every morning for breakfast here. But it has a very unique taste and texture that isn't for everyone. So I just want to use this because this is something, a literature search I actually did recently conduct, and I think it gives a good example of the steps and the importance of some of the details I talked about before. Okay, so step 1 is just understand why you want to do something. So this is, for me, is just learning more about a topic of interest so that I can make a personal health decision. What was my question? What are the health benefits of this food, of natto? If I'm going to be investing in buying it and making, and actually making it a part of my daily routine. Okay. The type of evidence that I wanted for this, I didn't necessarily need to download research scientific articles. I just kind of wanted to get a general sense of what the health benefits were. I didn't necessarily need to understand like the biochemistry behind those health benefits. So I was okay reading scientific evidence that was presented in a sort of easy to read way, as long as, again, the quality was evident, this was something that was vetted by an expert. Okay, so I decided that I could just use Google because, again, I was looking for I was pretty open about the sources and the type of source that I would be willing to read. And then what I chose as my search phrase was health benefits of natto. Okay, so before, I don't want to make any assumptions. How comfortable would you be implementing these? So if you went through something like this on your own, to go to Google and to search for a phrase, how would you feel about implementing those 2 steps? Is it very easy and so, kind of something fun that you always do, or actually would it be a little bit challenging for you? So again, I'll stop just to stop talking and give you a chance to do something for 1 or 2 minutes. Please go ahead and let me know how comfortable you would be with implementing a literature search in Google. They don't want to influence your answers if you see how others are responding. So I'll advance it in another minute. Okay. So we have a nice distribution here. I am a statistician by training, so I like looking at the distribution of data. Okay, so I see people are still responding. So it's definitely higher response rate, being in the more positive direction, meaning people feel that this type of a search is fairly easy or straightforward, but there are some people online who would find it quite challenging. Okay, so that's good to know. So the idea is that to conduct this type of literature search, you would, and it is a literature search, an evidence search, you would go to google.com. Okay, so you would open a web browser, you'd go to google.com, and there's a box where you would type to conduct your literature search. And so you would want to come up with the phrase or the question that you have. And when you type it and press enter, you will get a list of results. Okay, and so this is just a screenshot of the first couple of search results that I see when I search for health benefits of natto. I added beans at the end here. All right, and so these first two search results are from healthline.com and health.com. So these are like wellness or nutrition websites. So I clicked on both of these just to see what's there. So for the first one, the Healthline, it says why natto is super healthy and nutritious. So the top title already kind of gives away the fact that this is definitely in favor of natto. But I wanted to see like objectively whether this article would be a good one to read. So I noticed in the upper right here that it says that it's fairly recent. So it was written in January of 2023. So it's less than 2 years old. It was written by a nutritionist, a registered dietitian. Sorry, it was written by a registered dietitian, but also reviewed by another one. So you had one person, a primary author, and then somebody who reviewed it to make sure that it was strong enough. Okay. So these are parts of assessing the quality. And it's important that we look at this as part of the literature search, because if we aren't happy with the results of the literature search, we're not done. We have to, make a step and a change and repeat it. Okay. If you scroll down in that same reference, the same Healthline article, I see this. And there are references. So here it's saying how it was made, how it was changed to modernize the preparation method. And later on, there are more details about the health benefits. But for each reference, what I found interesting about this website is that they give you the source. So I could click on go to source and it would actually provide the source of the evidence here. But it also gave the website's own quality assessment of that source. So it came from PubMed Central. It was a trusted source, and it's a highly respected database from the National Institutes of Health in the US. So it provides references to support the statements, and then it also gives a short assessment of the quality of those, not of the research, but of where the research was found. Okay. All right, so that's for the first one. So then the second one, I also clicked on this, and it's similar in that it was written by a registered dietitian, reviewed by another person who would be considered in a position of authority on the topic, and it was even more recent. There's also references. You can see here that these are references, and at the end they include the full reference. So if I wanted to, I could go to the scientific article that they're referencing. But what's actually written here is a kind of a easier to read summary of that evidence. So it could benefit heart health, gut health, and fight inflammation. But the mechanisms by which it does that, I could read more about if I wanted to by looking at the article. Okay, so those are the first two references from my literature search. So from my perspective, it seems like I found evidence that there's some quality assessment suggests it's strong evidence or could be quite reliable. It also addresses my question. It is talking about the health benefits of natto, and I found two sources, so it's always good to read more than one just to make sure it's they're consistent and accurate. Okay, and by using Google, I was able to get those sources. So it seems like the search engine I chose was an appropriate one as well. Another nice thing about Google is if you scroll down, so this is that same result from health benefits of natto beans. If I scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page, there's this section people also search for. And so sometimes by looking at this, you might get an idea of something a little more specific or a different way of framing your question that you're searching the literature for. And you could click on it, and it could give you a different set of results that may actually more closely align with what it is that you have interest in. Yeah, so maybe the question isn't just health benefits in general, but maybe the frequency with which you eat is important. So maybe the question was actually, what are the benefits of eating it every day? Okay. So I put this here just because this is a question you want to ask before you conclude your search, right? And start reviewing the literature. You want to make sure that the search was effective and that you now have access to the literature you needed in order to address your question. And you may conduct more searches in the future if you have additional questions or after you've read through these resources, but you just want to know if you've achieved your goal, at least as a starting point, or if you need to go back and revisit one of the steps in the process and revise what you did. But from my perspective, I feel like by using Google, we were able to find a couple of references or sources of information with higher quality evidence that we could read and get a general idea to address the question, and that maybe it would provide us with additional evidence or to do further searches based on what we're finding here. Okay, so here's another example. What if this, instead of just wanting to make a personal health decision, you actually want to find literature or evidence because you're writing a paper, a manuscript, writing up your results, and you want to find some literature to support the statements you're making in the background of your paper. Okay, and so for this example, I'm working on a project. There's a new emerging infectious disease in Asia. It's not new. It was detected in 2009 in China, and then more recently, about 5 years after that, it was detected in Japan. But there are more and more cases every year. It's called SFTS, and so it's important that more research be done about this, and so this is something that we're currently working on here. But yeah, if you wanted to write up the background section of a paper, or even like for a grant proposal or a report you're working on, you need to have scientific evidence to support what you're stating in the background of the paper or the grant proposal. Okay, so the purpose of the literature search would be to support statements that you are making as the author of that report or grant proposal or paper, because you want to be making statements and your work that you're proposing to be, or that you've conducted, to be rooted in other evidence. Okay, so what question or topic is of interest? In this case, how is the infection spread? If I wanted to state that the way that the virus is spread there are a lot of pathways. There are a lot of ways that the virus can go from the environment or animals to humans. So these pathways are diverse, and they're also specific to the context. So for instance, in Japan, It's often through animals. In other settings, it could just be through tick bites. Okay. So in this case, it's important that the literature I'd be searching for would be scientific research published in peer-reviewed journals. So I wouldn't want to just be reading a blog post or a short sort of editorial about this. I would want to be using other research to support this statement. Okay, so what I might decide to use to find that scientific research is a database like Google Scholar. And something I may search for is how is the virus transmitted from the insect, to different animal hosts. Okay, so this is more technical language based on the specific topic. I wouldn't expect you to have come up with this because you're not familiar with the disease, but just again, emphasizing that it's specific, talking about a particular vector that transmits the virus to a particular set of hosts, and what is it that's being spread is a particular disease. So it's being quite specific. Okay, now just as a note, this example is at the point where you're proposing a project as part of a grant, or you're writing up a manuscript for research you've already done. So you're probably already well aware of the topic, right? So if you were hired as a consultant and you're now writing up the report, I'm sure you've already done a very thorough literature search and understood, or literature review, I should say, and understand what you're writing about because you've been involved in a project for a while. Or if you're writing up a manuscript, again, you've conducted research, so you're aware of the topic. Or if you're even writing a grant proposal, it's something you've thought a lot about. So at this step, you've done a lot of background reading, you're coming up with a statement, and now you just need to make sure that your statement has references or citations at the end to support the ideas that you're including in your background section. Okay, so in this example, you could use something like Google Scholar. So instead of going to google.com, you go to scholar.google.com. And this extra word makes a big difference in the type of results you get. The search engine, though, looks similar, where you have a box and then you just press search. So once you've gone through those 5 steps for your own topic of interest, that step 5, where you have your search term or your search phrase, you just copy and paste it directly into the box and you press search. And then the list of findings or search results will appear. Okay. Here you can see how many other researchers may have cited that work. And so one metric often for quality or relevance of research can be the number of citations it has. Not always, but that's one indicator. You can see a little snippet of what journal they were published in. So if you are a researcher, you may be familiar with some journals, and there are certain journals that are quite reputable, or I should say better known. So you can also be looking at that. Okay, you can choose if you want to narrow your results to be more recent. You can say, I only want to see results from the last 4 or 5 years. You can do a custom range, and these are just clicking. Okay, so if that's relevant to you, you can do that. And then at the top here, it says how many results match this search phrase. So you have a sense of, yeah, like how many results were shown. And so again, this is quite a specific search that I've done, that you most likely have never heard of this disease before, because it is quite new and not too researched yet. But just by searching at this, what I notice is that my statement that I want references to support is that the transmission, so the spread of this infection, is through many different pathways. So many different animals could be intermediate hosts before humans get infected, right? And it's also, those pathways change depending on maybe which country you're in. And so when you do a quick look through glance at the results, China is popping up quite a bit. So maybe my search term didn't do a good enough job to capture other contexts. So maybe some of these references would be really strong to include, but in order to make sure that I've included references that talk about different contexts, I may also want to update my search to include other countries where this disease is becoming increasingly more common. So if I specify at the very end now Japan and Korea, I find results from other contexts as well, or from all three. So I can now have maybe results that are a bit more can support my statement a bit more strongly. Okay, so the idea here is you need scientific results. So we chose Google Scholar. We need results that can help us support a statement in the background section of an output, a product like a manuscript, a report, or a grant proposal. Okay, so we already kind of have an idea of what we want to say, but we want to make sure that it's rooted in the evidence and there are citations at the end of that statement. So what we want to find is the best evidence to support the statement. So we can update our search to make sure that the evidence matches our statement as closely as possible. Okay. I know this is a lot of information and we may be running short on time. So I'm thinking maybe we can stop here and see what questions there are. And then depending on how many questions there are, we can go through a third example, or we can just address the questions. So I'm happy if people want to put up their hands or put them in the chat, either way.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Laura Scrip. So far, there is no question in the chat box, but dear participants, if you have any question, kindly use the hand raise icon so that we can accommodate your questions at this point. Alternatively, you can use the chat box to send in your questions. Okay, ma'am. But while we wait to accommodate the questions, I think you can proceed. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Okay, so I have one last example. You may have heard of something called a systematic review. So a systematic review is actually a whole methodology. So systematic review is a literature search, or searching for literature and reviewing literature. And it's in and of itself, it's a research process. So if you undertook a systematic review, it's as if you're doing a research study. Okay, so but it starts with a very thorough search. So I think that sometimes people, when they think of literature search, they may associate it with something like a more thorough systematic review. So I wanted to make sure I gave this as a specific example as well. But if you wanted to conduct a systematic review, this involves your purpose for doing the search then would be to systematically identify all available evidence. And maybe you would want to find evidence from, say, the past 5 years. So you want to systematically review very recent and up-to-date scientific evidence. Okay. And in terms of a question, again, you would have to come up with your question. This was just something that I put as an example. Right now, there's an increasing, this is something that's been known and studied for a very long time, but I think there's increasing focus and more investment being put in the relationship between malnutrition and infectious disease. So maybe a question would be, how much does undernutrition change susceptibility to infection, right? And so I made this very specific, talking about a particular type of disease, and focusing on people who weren't vaccinated, because nutrition status can change how well the vaccine protects a person from infection. So this, again, is just not something I would expect you to necessarily have interest in, or to have developed as an idea or question on your own. But I put this here just to show you how specific, or how important it is to be as specific as possible. So again, your question wouldn't necessarily be, what is the relationship between nutrition and infectious disease? You would want to be much more specific. So for instance, the relationship between nutrition and the susceptibility to infection for measles in particular, and focusing on, say, children who have not been vaccinated. Okay, so for systematic review, it's typically using most often scientific research that's been published, but a lot of times there are systematic reviews that include what we call gray literature, which would be reports or evidence briefs. So they aren't necessarily published in a journal, but they are publicly available documents of research or of data collection that was done. Okay, so in this case, maybe you would use something like PubMed as a database. And I just wanted to emphasize that a systematic review is the use of specific methods. It's a research study in and of itself, to identify all available evidence. So when you search here, you have to use a different set of search terms to make sure you get all evidence that's been published on your topic. So you have to be very thorough. So there's one approach is using Boolean search terms. So you comprehensively search. And again, these are in the slides, which can be shared. But the idea here is that your search phrase isn't just going to be the question by itself, because you want to capture all possible ways of saying that, to make sure that if an author published a paper on the immunity or immune response to measles, and how nutrition affects that, versus another author who talked about, susceptibility to measles, and somebody who used the word immunized versus vaccinated, right? All of these are important differences to think about, because you want to capture all evidence, not just some, and leave out others because you didn't comprehensively search the literature. So a systematic review requires a very, very thorough literature search through multiple databases like PubMed to find all possible evidence that's been published on the topic within a predefined time period. So your search term might look something like this, and the Boolean is using or and and. Okay? So this is quite a complex skill that, my goal isn't to necessarily teach you how to do this, because we have such a short period of time together. This is something that there could be a whole talk on, but I just want to make you aware of it. So if you were planning to do a systematic review and that was your interest in joining today, making sure that you can identify resources to really understand how to conduct that type of a literature search. Okay, so the PubMed search engine may look like this. All right, so it's similar. There's a box where you type your search phrase or search term. This is the link to PubMed, but you could just go to Google and search PubMed, and the link to the same platform will appear. Okay, and you can search in here. Again, if I wanted to, I could have come here and typed the health benefits of natto, right? But the results are going to be more like what we saw in Google Scholar and less this like what we saw from our initial search in Google, which was more like health.com, written by a dietitian, kind of easier to understand. When you come to a place like PubMed, it's going to be very technical language in the articles you find, okay? So here I've typed in the whole search phrase and pressed search, and then these are the results you see. So again, it looks a little more similar to the output from Google Scholar. You also have things you can check on the side to limit the time period or the types of articles you want. We said initially we wanted to search for a 5-year time period. So I found 430 results with my initial search. But then when you narrow in the search period to the last 5 years, it goes down to 61. And you can see that the different results here reflect measles. They reflect risk factors such as malnutrition. They have words like immunization and immunity. So they are related to the topic. You would have to then do the review part and read the articles to make sure that they are very specific and relevant to your topic of interest. But this would be to, again, to search to identify that literature, and the next step would be the review. Okay, and so the key thing here is that you can always go back and refine your search list, your search phrase or your list of search terms once you've seen the results and see if they seem to be relevant, or if maybe they're not as relevant. Maybe you need to just change the phrase to get more relevant results. And this is something that isn't only for this third example, but it could be for any other example that we've discussed as well. Okay. For the question about which search engine may make citing or referencing easier. So there, I saw that question in the chat. That's a really great question. I think Google Scholar makes referencing easy. Sorry, I'm gonna go back here. This is the result from the Google Scholar. If you look here, there's a site link, and if you click this, you get a pop-up box that gives the citation for the article in different formats like MLA, Chicago, APA, and you can just copy and paste it there to put in your article. So that's really helpful. PubMed, you can export the referencing in a format that you can then open in a text edit document, or that you could then read into a software such as EndNote or something like that. Here you do see it says import into BibTeX. So this is another way to link to a referencing software. But if you're manually doing the references, I find Google Scholar to be quite helpful, because again, you can just click here and copy and paste the citations directly. Specifics, yes. So specific search engines for specific subject areas, absolutely. So PubMed is more specific to, say, health or maybe like biomedical sciences. But there are many other search engines and databases, sorry. On the web step 4 here, so selecting the database or search engine. This first link, I'll open it right now and just hopefully the internet will allow me to show you. This is with the Smithsonian Institute. Okay, or Smithsonian Libraries. It includes a list of many different research databases. For instance, something of more social science focus like Anthropology Plus, some PubMed is again biomedical or life science, health related research, geoscience, so there's many different here. There's even then more focused databases on birds, for instance, or fish, whatever it may be, botanical sciences, and the list goes on and on and on. So there are many. And some of these do require access by through pay, especially for the much more specific ones, because they require the pay in order to have a set of staff of personnel to maintain it. So it's hard, it makes it less accessible, but otherwise they wouldn't have the database if they didn't charge something to users. Okay. Yes, so I see a question about some full manuscripts are not free and the costs are usually expensive. What do you advise? Can we cite? Okay, so if the abstract contains sufficient information that addresses your question, so again, if your purpose is to just have a measure of the effectiveness of a vaccine, sometimes that can be stated directly in the abstract. So you could cite the article based on the evidence that you're using directly from the abstract. The concern there is whether the abstract gave the full picture. Sometimes you can't give the full results or all of the full interpretation of all of the results. So it's always better to read the full methods that were used to obtain those results. It also helps you assess the quality and the reliability of them. But to directly answer your question, if the abstract has what you need, you could stop there. There are some ways that I've found effective at getting around paywalls. So there is definitely a shift. A lot of funders now require that publications that come from the projects they fund are published open access, which means that the authors have to pay more, but the readers don't have to pay anything to access the articles. But there definitely are many articles that are still published without open access. So one thing you could do is you could see if the author has put it on like ResearchGate or something as a PDF, or you could contact the author to ask for a PDF of the article. There's also something called Sci-Hub, which tries to get around paywall, and I'm often successful at finding articles on Sci-Hub. Not always, but sometimes PDFs that I can't access. Another option is if you know someone who's affiliated with a university that has access to different databases, you could ask them for a favor to send you the PDF of the article. That's another option. So I would try to access the full text before you only use the abstract. But sometimes I understand it's not always possible. Can I publish literature review as a manuscript? Absolutely. I think at this point, there's so much evidence. So going back to one of the first slides I had, showing the impact being related to application, right? So right now, I think a lot of people are focused on conducting and publishing primary research, right? But I think there's so much research right now that synthesizing what already exists is really important. So you can publish a literature review, especially if it's done systematically. Meaning that you are accounting for all of the evidence that you've found and that's been published, and then you summarize it. I think that that's really helpful for people to apply it when they can see the review of everything. You've sort of taken that step away. People don't have to go through and do their own literature search and literature reviews. You've done that work for them, and that's really important. The key thing is that, again, it's done according to best practices, and that you make sure nobody else has done it. So a lot of people are conducting and publishing literature reviews. You want to make sure that yours contributes something novel and it's not something that's already recently been done and published. I see Rufina, you have a hand up.
Yes, good morning, ma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my question, please, is on what we are discussing. My first question, please, I want to find out, how do you determine the database or search engine that would be best suited for our question, research question? Then two, do you think that the first two pop-ups when we go into a search engine that gives us the most recent, is it the best, or we can still go further, to get the best that suits what we are searching for? Then my third question is, when doing a scoping review, how do you determine the search engine you use, or you use as many as possible, and then the one that best suits you is what you should conclude on? Because I'm doing a scoping review on family health nursing in Africa, but I was told that that topic is too bold, that is too wide, and I have to streamline it. But my problem is that I don't have enough literatures when I come down to the level of my country here, Nigeria, on this particular topic. So I want to find out, is it that I need to drop it and look for another topic that I'll have enough literatures to work on, or I can continue with it that way? Then I want to find out also, how many search engines should we use when we are doing a scoping review or a systematic review? Thank you, ma.
Okay, thank you. So I hope I'm going to remember all of your questions. So the first one was how to determine which database to use. I think it comes down to two things. Yeah, what it is that you're doing the search for. If it is for something like a scoping review, then you would want a database that will produce results, both, I guess, scientific, big peer-reviewed articles, and then maybe also gray literature like reports. So for that would help you define which database to use, and then again the topic. So if a topic is health related or nursing, there are specific databases that are probably better to use than others. So in order to come up with which one is best, I have a couple of suggestions. One being, use some of these links that have lists of databases. So like the Smithsonian Institute one that I showed you just a few minutes ago. There's a few like Scopus, PubMed, even Google Scholar there that would probably be relevant to the scoping review topic you mentioned. They're either broad-based, so they have publications on all fields, or fields that are more health related. So those are often commonly used. Another thing you could do is you could look at systematic reviews or scoping reviews that have previously been done, not on the same topic, but maybe a similar topic, and see what databases and their methods they used. So when you read a systematic review that's been published, the methods are very similar from one systematic review to another. They say which search engines they searched, what their search terms were, what the dates they included were, what languages the articles could be published in. There are these key things that need to be identified in the methods section of a systematic review based on established checklists. And so you'll see it again and again. But that means they're very helpful to read to help inform what you can do in your own systematic review. So if you find one on, say, community health worker programs, you can look through a few systematic reviews on topics related to community health and see which databases those authors used and that can help guide you as well. So I think that that's one strategy. In terms of your second question about, sorry, the second question, I remember the third and fourth, but the second question, let me move on to yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My second question, I was trying to find out which of the search engines that is best used for scoping review or systematic review. Now, which
Yeah.
one would you recommend, ma?
Yeah, so you often would use more than one, and again, it's because the systematic review and scoping review, like they should be comprehensive. So the idea is to review all available literature, all available evidence or literature based on your criteria. So you don't want to leave any article out just because it wasn't in a given database. So your best chance for comprehensively accessing all evidence that's been published and according to your topic is to use multiple databases, and then you merge your findings. So if you do the search in 4 databases, you can then merge the findings and remove the duplicates, because a lot of the time what you find in, say, PubMed will also be what you find in Web of Science and Scopus, for instance. But there will be a few others that are unique to each of those databases. So that's why you look in multiple databases. So again, which database you use depends on the topic. If it is related to something health or science related, I think PubMed is quite commonly used. Web of Science is quite commonly used. But there are many others. Some people use Google Scholar. The one downside of Google Scholar is it also includes a lot of other types of articles, not only peer-reviewed published articles, but it includes like preprints and other versions and other types of articles that, if they're not part of your inclusion criteria, it would just give you excess things to review. But I think Google Scholar is a valid source as well. So what I would encourage you to do, though, outside of those that I just mentioned, to look at the lists in some of the links I provide, and choose them, and then also read systematic reviews that have already been published, and look at the databases at the end of them, and what's been what has been used there, what databases. So I see the question has come up again. So let me see if I can find something quickly to address that. The other thing you mentioned about whether you need to change your topic, you've been told that it's too broad.
Yes,
Yeah, to narrow in a topic is not only to change the geographic area. Okay, so that's one way to narrow a topic. So if you search for something and you get, hundreds of thousands of results, then what you may have so much evidence. So it may be important to narrow it in on geography or time, reducing the period of time over which the evidence was published that you want to review. So those are ways to narrow it, but also being more specific. So I gave you the example of looking at the relationship between undernutrition and infectious disease. If I just use that as my topic, it would be way too broad, because, well, first of all, I mean, that's been studied so much, and there have been many reviews that have been written on that topic. However, by narrowing it to a specific infectious disease and looking at one way that they are related, and then also narrowing in the population to only be focused on unvaccinated children, it's still looking at the nutrition and infectious disease, but in a much more focused way. So that's just I think that that's sort of the feedback that you're getting is more suggesting you need to narrow your topic or be more specific about your topic, not only change the geography of where the articles have been published. So I think, yes, that's my understanding of the topic. In terms of how to do that, the same people who are giving you the feedback on needing to narrow in your topic, maybe you could ask them for some advice, if they could discuss with you or a couple of ways that they think you could do that. Or another example would be to, again, read literature, read other systematic reviews, not necessarily on the same topic as yours, but just to get a sense of the types of objectives, research objectives, or research questions that are important to ask for a literature review. Yeah.
Thank you very much, I'm grateful.
Okay. All right. You're welcome. Let me. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. So here is just a systematic review. I went to PLAW's Global Public Health, which is a journal. It's open access. All of their articles are freely available. It's a journal I like to follow and look at new articles that are published there. And this is a systematic review that was published in August of this year, so just about 2 months ago. And I'm just going to scroll down to the methods. So like I said, for systematic reviews, the method sections are very similar because they follow this checklist called PRISMA guidelines, okay? And so if you go through it, its search strategy is right here, and it says the search was completed in PubMed, Embase, and Web of Science. Okay, so here is a health-related systematic review on leprosy and stigma. Okay, and these were the 3 databases they used. So my answer about which databases to use, one of my strategies to address that question was, or my suggestion was to look at other systematic reviews and see what databases they're using. So here's just an example of how you would do that. You would look for a systematic review recently published in a given journal and look in the methods at what databases they may have used. And then, so these 3 are quite common and well respected and well known. Okay. I see expand more on the referencing and citation part after identifying an article from the search. Sure. So if you conduct a search in Google Scholar, for instance, I'm just gonna, well, let's see. I see an article, a recommended article. This is because I'm logged in, and so this is based on my types of articles I look up and have looked into recently. Let me just conduct a quick search. Okay. Great. So Mpox in East Africa, learning from COVID and Ebola to strengthen public health responses. Okay, so after you conduct a search in Google Scholar, if you review one of the articles and find that it addresses your interest, your topic, your question, and you want to cite it and reference it, this link right here, which you can see is under every single article, will, I hope you can see the pop-up. It gives you the citation in many different formats, so you can copy it. I hope sometimes when I click a pop-up you can't see it, but the pop-up Yes, okay, so I think it's visible now. So like MLA, APA, Chicago, all these different styles. So you can just copy this as the reference based on the citation style you need. Or you can click on one of these if you're using, say, EndNote. SciWheel is something if you're writing in Google Docs, you can use SciWheel for referencing there. These are some different reference softwares if you are using those. Otherwise, yes, if you're manually doing it, you can copy from here. Even if you're using PubMed to do your search, once you find an article that you want to use, you could always come to Google Scholar to search for that article and use that same cite tool. Once you're within the article, there's often, yeah, you can see here, there's cite as well. So there are other sources of help with citations as well. Okay. But it is important. So that's a key thing. Again, I focus more on the search. So after the search comes the review of the literature you found. And then after that review, you then use it, right, in your writing, which then requires that you, especially if it's not for immediate decision making, but if it's for writing in a manuscript or a report or something, you need to then cite, yeah, that. And even if it's for a systematic review, you would cite all articles that you included in your review. So that's, yeah, that's important to think about as well. Seeing email addresses in the chat, but I don't think I hope I haven't missed any questions in the midst of these emails. I see something about writing styles and journals accept literature reviews. So a lot of journals now, as a article type, there are reviews. So there could be a couple different formats. There could be something that's done according to the PRISMA guidelines, which would be more of a systematic review. So that follows very specific methodology to systematically review the evidence. And the scoping review is quite similar. You still would want to follow that systematic methodology. Then there's another type of review that's more just talking about the latest evidence and what's known about a disease. So it's not necessarily reviewing the literature, but it's using the literature to review the topic. So so it's sort of like for a new disease that was found, a disease that maybe is of interest again, maybe a reemergence happened or something, maybe somebody would write a review to talk about the latest, everything that's known about that to date. But not necessarily using every article that's been published about it, but essentially having a review of what is known. So what is known if it's an infectious disease about how it spreads, what is known about available treatment options, what is known about available prevention methods, and then using literature to support the statements, but it won't necessarily include all literature that's been published. Whereas a systematic review or scoping review is more focused on finding all available evidence and synthesizing and summarizing it to say what has all of the literature found to and about a particular topic. So it's they're slightly different, but a lot of journals accept both types. So one might be more of like they call it like systematic reviews or meta-analyses. And then the other type of review, sometimes they call it an analysis article, or it's kind of analyzing the situation and using the literature to support your analysis of the situation. Okay, so how do you get the literature you searched those articles into your Mendeley? So for Mendeley, you have a couple options. You could either go directly to the article, so it doesn't have to be in the database. It could be directly in the article, and like cite. So for instance, here's the option to cite. This is within a MDPI journal article, just one that I clicked on. There's a cite option here, and then you can export the citation file. So for Mendeley, I think either BibTeX or RIS would work, I believe. I think RIS. So then you download it and then you import the file. So if you click on one of these, you would get a download that you could then read into or import into Mendeley. So you just need to make sure that the format is the correct one. I think it's RIS for Mendeley. So that would be how to do it. Alternatively, you could always manually enter it. So in Mendeley, you could add a new reference and then type in the details. It's not as nice as being able to do it automatically, but it is one approach. Here's an article in the Lancet Infectious Diseases. Let's see. It's a correspondence piece. Again, there's a cite, right? So this is a completely different journal. There's a cite, and it asks you how you want to export it, but I think it gives it in RIS, which should work in Mendeley. So you press export, and here are the details it's saying of that. So that's typically what you would do, or in Google Scholar, you click on cite, and again, for Mendeley, I would need to search, to be honest, which reference format it requires. I think it's RIS. So it should be the same one that EndNote or RefMan uses. So but you could try downloading and just seeing which gives you the .RIS format. Okay, and then checking for plagiarism. So that's, again, at that next step. So once you've reviewed the literature, I'm thinking you're talking about your own. So part of the review and writing a literature review, it's really important that you don't like copy and paste from the articles you find through your search. But sometimes maybe the way your style of writing, you just want to make sure that what you've written is very different from what others have written. Either way, yes, it's important to check plagiarism, but I think the best thing to do is never to just copy and paste directly from another source, even if it's one sentence. I know I've worked with students from a lot of different settings, and I always encounter people who they find they do a really strong job outlining what they want to write in, say, a literature review. They find a lot of sources, but then rather than just writing and then adding a citation, they may copy a sentence from this source and then copy a sentence from that source, and because they're integrating all of the different sources, they don't recognize that may be plagiarizing. But by copying and pasting from another source, that is plagiarizing. Even if you then go in and change some of the words, you're still really taking another person's idea directly and just changing the words to sort of get around plagiarism software. So before worrying about how to check plagiarism, I would strongly recommend that you make sure your writing style and your technique involves you putting your own words down on paper. And then if you're concerned that your things like grammar or your style may not be as scientific as they need to be because you're still learning. There are different resources that can help with language editing for like manuscripts, and a lot of them are free. There's also things like Grammarly, which can help improve sentence structure and give you suggestions on how to rephrase your sentence. But the idea is that you rephrase your own words, not somebody else's. If you still want to check plagiarism, though, there are different softwares. There's Grammarly has a plagiarism check, Turnitin, but these some of these require that you have a subscription. But you could always go to Google and search for plagiarism checker, and there are some softwares that allow you to do a few checks for free. So that's something you can do. When you submit to a journal, it often does the similarity check or plagiarism check and gives you feedback on that as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laura. I think we've taken all the questions for today. The participation has been sustained and the energy has been sustained right from the beginning till this point. Thank you very much. We appreciate your expertise, which you have brought on board this morning. It's been an insightful session and we appreciate you dearly. Thank you very much, dear participants. Please let's, with a round of applause, appreciate our dear speaker, Dr. Laura Scrape. Thank you so much. So as communicated previously, this webinar session was organized by Plus-CircleCommunityHealth Advancement Organization, and it's a weekly webinar which focuses on building our research capacity. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to reconvene next week, Saturday again, same time. Please invite your friends so that we all can share knowledge on this platform. Till then, please enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye for now.
Thank you. Happy weekend.